My name is Dr. Kummer, and it's a pleasure being with you virtually, unfortunately, because usually, we would also run things really in person, on site, and it will be a pleasure spending time with you. I guess, we've all suffered a little bit through COVID, I guess, but I think we've got really great news when it comes to mergers and acquisitions going forward. And it would be a pleasure presenting to you what we analyzed in terms of what's happening in M&A, particularly in the region, and what we think the future outlook and some of the future challenges are for organizations pursuing mergers and acquisitions. We have structured the presentation basically in three parts. One is that we will look at like what's going on currently in M&A in Southeast Asia. Happy also to, of course, comment from a more global perspective as well. The second part is discussing a little bit some of the challenges that companies actually pursue and face when pursuing acquisitions and divestments. And then last but not least, we will present to you a little bit like what our role as IMAA is in terms of how we support organizations and capability building, and are grateful that we can cooperate here with IBF as well. So for the first bit of like what's happening, I mean, of course, when the virus stroked the world, there were some parts that were hit harder than others, and the world stopped at some parts. But I think we need to go on a little bit with sort of our lives, and that's a little bit what we can see. That actually sort of the number of deal value in the region has really significantly increased over time. We see also significantly more deals, and also we see a higher average deal size. Who are pursuing these deals? I mean, it is very much driven by strategic buyers in the region. I mean, we have some regions that are way more driven and affected by financial buyers who also have a lot of financial resources available. But what we see is like that strategic buyers really consider using acquisitions and mergers as a tool to realize their strategy. We still see a lot of acquirers worldwide that sometimes are not exactly clear what they want to achieve. So we believe that having a clear corporate strategy that guides all these activities will definitely help in pursuing better deals and making deals more successful. We see that not only closing deals is great, but making these closed deals as a success is way more sort of important. When we look at the country split here, I mean, as Singapore is very well located and one of the growth areas of the world, a major chunk happens in Vietnam. That's also where myself and the Institute, we spent a lot of time with Vietnamese companies and with foreign companies in Vietnam, and happy to comment from this perspective as well, what the opportunities there are. And where probably one should be rather careful and what the challenges sort of could be. But the good message is really that we see things really pick up, and we believe that this will continue, because I mean, kind of the shock is absorbed. We know the virus now. We will be living with it going forward in whatever way. And so therefore the outlook is really great. I mean, some of the key drivers that drive some of the M&A are low interest rates still. I mean, depending on how some of the developments will be going forward in terms of inflation and how some of the central banks may or may not react to this. But given the fact that most governments or national banks will want to support economic growth going forward, we expect the interest rates to rather stay low for some time, despite of inflation. And capital is available. I mean, as investment opportunities, people look for great investment opportunities. So therefore, funds, are not a problem. And the great thing is funds in M&A are available to almost any company. You just need to know how to raise them and how to use them. But these tools are available to everyone worldwide, wherever you come from, wherever you do deals. Capital is largely available. Yeah. And if you take a look at, like, where, the biggest deals have happened in the region, or, what were the biggest deals, we tried sort of to do some number crunching here. So I won't read, these slides, exactly to you. I think, if you want to study some of these materials, we will share this with you, so you can do so. I would just highlight, what I think is most important. And of all the messages on this slide, I think, the most important question is, like, on valuation. I mean, pre-COVID, we've seen, very interesting and high valuations globally, and some of this has been a little bit adjusted now. And I think that, pose also a great opportunity to acquire companies for, reasonable prices, which I think is a, key ingredient for making deals a success. Because, I mean, if we buy, overpriced businesses, I mean, there's, hardly anything we can do with it to make it, a success, unless we find somebody who wants to buy this at a higher price. But that's something different. That's a pricing game. There's not really talking about real value and valuations here. And that's what we try to do. Look at, our, valuations, and can we create sustainable value in these acquisitions? And therefore, that's really great news to see that, valuations have come down a little bit from a buy side point of view. From a sell side point of view, we actually look at, like, saying, like, too bad, selling companies at high prices is not possible anymore. It is, because, great companies will still achieve a great price. So I wouldn't say that it's not a good opportunity to sell companies. But obviously, the overall valuations have come down a little bit, and that's, from a buy side point of view, very good message. If we drill down into a country by country perspective, and I mean, I assume most of the audience is from Singapore, so it may be fair to take a look at what has happened in Singapore within the time period that we looked at, from 2020 to second quarter of 2021. Largely was a Japanese painting company acquiring a couple of companies here in Singapore. And Japanese acquirers have really taken on acquisitions over the last couple of years, and do way more, some of them very strategically. Some of that in the region, kind of a little bit political as well, to balance forces in the region. And then we see other transactions here, some even as a combined effort by investors, which we can see in other countries too. But largely, I think if we compare this to other countries, it's a very international mix of investors and acquisitions here in Singapore, which is no surprise. We turn the page to Vietnam, that we mentioned already as one of the major countries that people are interested in making investments in. We see a couple of smaller deals compared to Singapore, but still sizable given the Vietnamese market and the companies coming up for sale. I mean, a lot of acquisitions and possible deals in Vietnam in the past have been kind of a little bit more privatizations and little stakes in state-owned companies, which has its advantages and also poses some challenges. Interestingly, also some deals here sort of in the real estate sector, which, given, the things that we see happening in China, probably we need to be careful a little bit for some time, I guess. And also that real estate in Vietnam works a little bit different in terms, like, can foreign people own real estate? So there are some limitations still to this, while lots of other restrictions in doing foreign acquisitions and foreign ownership have been revoked in Vietnam. So it's open for investments, and happy to discuss any of this way more in detail if you post something in Q&A or later in the Q&A sector. Malaysia and Thailand, the most striking thing is that it's mostly national deals happening there. There's, at the top level, that's not cross-border. That's something that we had expected to happen because of the restrictions in traveling and other things for many countries worldwide, that M&A would now turn more to domestic M&A. Something that you obviously often can also see, not only because of COVID, but when you see GDP decrease a little bit, or economic difficulties, usually less cross-border transactions happen. So that's not something completely surprising, but it's completely different and opposite to what we've seen in Singapore and Vietnam. So maybe that's one of the major differences. Indonesia, makes difference. Also, at least one cross-border deal that made it into the top deals. Philippines, same, at least one deal that made it into the top deals of cross-border deals. So multinational corporations are holding back a little bit. I guess the funds are not holding back. So let's see how this will play out as hopefully borders will open up again. And of course, we have the effect that a lot of M&A work, like, this presentation here today works also like, in a digitalized way. Lots of due diligence can be conducted in a virtual way to some extent. And some discussions and negotiations can be held virtually as well. A lot of valuation things are in the making, to be digitalized, and we work with a lot of people on special project management for M&A and integration work. The tools are there, we just need to use them. But at the end of the day, I personally believe that a lot of these M&A deals are driven by people, and that will remain a major point in this. And so travel restrictions don't help actually sort of cross-border deals. Let me turn the page a little bit to what we see in the sectors, which industries have been hot and heat up again. So the major chunk of deals happen in the material, energy, utilities, and industrial sector. That's not kind of a surprise. And we see also some of the commodity prices pick up, like oil and gas, and that will probably fuel M&A in this field again, as some of the oil and gas players also doing more stuff downstream, not only resource-wise. There will be way more to come in this sector. IT, communications worldwide, globally, a extremely tremendous active sector. I believe also in Southeast Asia, with a very lively IT scene, there will be more coming. So that will be also a great sector of M&A activity. And consumer foods. I mean, consumer goods will be a major and continue to be a major focus. We've seen this pre-COVID, and once things open up again, definitely people want to enjoy their time in life, and will continue to spend also on consumer goods, not only off-premise consumption, but also on-premise consumption. And we will see more activities there, and hopefully kick back to the levels before this. Just to pick out some, I mean, healthcare, pharmaceuticals, globally, more activities happening than here in this region. And the financial service sector has always been of interest of M&A, and there are some countries where there's still some consolidation to happen in the banking sector, and fintech is of course quite en vogue as well. So lots of stuff that will happen in this with regard there too. We've also, put together, the top 10 deals in the region, so that you have a better overview of what has happened there, and you see some other deals of what we've mentioned before on the other slides. So that will be hopefully useful for you as a reference point. But again, I don't see my role here today in discussing each and every single deal. I guess like that depends also, like, what is your interest in this discussion? What industry are you from? So you can pick out what actually is most interesting to you. We have also looked into the geographies and the country by country perspective in deal activity. I mean, the Singapore market is per se a very lively market, but it is of course smaller in terms of size compared to some of the other geographies. And therefore, the total number of deals and volume happening there is sometimes a little bit volatile, at least when it comes to the value, right? I mean, a couple of big deals happening, and that drives the value line. So I'm never too obsessed about the value. of M&A deals in smaller markets, but more the number of deals. And I think we see a consistent upward trend here, which is quite important and way more sustainable and way more important to look at. Same in Vietnam, very, ups and downs in terms of value, because like, some mega deals, drive, the statistics here, and no database is complete. I mean, we try to do an okay job and really, finding whatever is around. The databases may not cover all of the deals anyway, but at least it gives us a good indication about the trends. Yeah. And Malaysia, you see, largely, values, big deals have picked up, and this will most likely a little bit continue. Thailand as well, we've had high hopes and high expectations of Thai M&A. We believe that this will be a market growing in terms of M&A a lot more. We see, of course, Thai companies also do a lot of deals in the region pre-COVID. That was a game changer a little bit, that besides China, besides Japan, also Thai companies pursued more M&A in the region, let alone, of course, Singaporean companies. Indonesia, very interesting market. I don't need to tell you, and the Philippines. That's a little bit on the numbers. I mean, that was a lot of numbers that you can look at, and again, you can we will share the material so you can study this in more depth, whatever markets, whatever sector you're interested in. We hope you find this useful. Also, the Institute provides numbers on our website, aggregate numbers, but we also provide these reports and tailored research for companies whenever this is needed, just if this is of interest to you. So let me turn the page to something, what we see, what challenges companies face actually when pursuing acquisitions and divestments. I mean, we believe that divestments are absolutely part of the picture, portfolio turnovers. Some of the hardest things to do, letting go of businesses that help, grow companies, make companies successful. And all companies around the world, but also in the region, face the question of like, are we too diversified? Have we gotten into too many areas? Do we need to focus on our core areas? And these are things where we see this influence and drive mergers and acquisitions, selling parts that are non-core, doing acquisitions in core areas to really focus, the groups a little bit more than maybe to previous times where everything has just naturally been growing. So that makes sense. From a buy side point of view, we have worked hard on thinking about like, how companies can make this more successful, that this really works out. We see a lot of acquirers in the region who think that, making a deal is just a matter of great negotiation, finding a great target, negotiating a great price. But we believe that people have learned a lot more capabilities, and deal making in the region becomes more and more competitive. So at least strategic buyers that we saw on the previous slides, which are the major chunk of acquirers, need to maybe revisit a little bit what they're doing. And one thing that I mentioned very much in the beginning is like really think about the strategy. Where does M&A really help you? Where is maybe M&A absolutely not the answer? I mean, despite the fact that we are an institute that deals a lot with M&A and strategic alliances, we don't think the answer is M&A all the time. Yeah, there may be alternatives as well. And you need to be selective where you use M&A and where you may use other ways of achieving your goals. And in the strategy discussion about like, where to do M&A, you should also, of course, take a look at like, what areas and what opportunities not to pursue. Also, how you build your M&A pipeline, how you proactively reach out to potential targets. We see a lot of companies that on one hand, pursue a lot of potential targets, while there's a lot of acquirers who do not really do their homework there and are, a little bit opportunistic and just look at the targets they get offered. And again, in sake of, being economic with resources, it makes sense to think about which opportunity you may not actually look at because they would not fit your strategy in order not to waste any resources. So the second really important thing that people, particularly in Southeast Asia, sometimes neglect a little bit is like integrating the companies and thinking about this early on. And this is why in this concept chart, we put this really, really early on and say, like, we should consider how we go about working with the company. Do we integrate it at all? Or do we keep it as a standalone unit? But, you know, where do we create some of the synergies? You know, some of my colleagues at other institutions sometimes, you know, smile about the word synergies and believe they don't exist. They do exist. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't, you know, do all of this, but we need to really corroborate where exactly are these synergies. They need to be extremely specific. We need to think bottom up, not top down. We see a lot of deals where people go proxy, like, you know, there's 5 or 10% synergies. That may be a good first indication, an educated guess maybe, but you should really bottom up think and define clearly where do these synergies come from. There could be revenue synergies, there could be cost synergies, that could be also dis-synergies. I mean, there are also disadvantages to M&A, so there are things that you need to consider here too. So that's what we see with the most advanced acquirers, and that should be done early on in the process. There's of course a lot of financial stuff going on, and I assume, given the fact that, you know, this webinar here together is hosted together with IBF, that we will have a lot of people from the finance community watch this. Finance, of course, is a key part of this, and a foundation for all of this. You know, how can I pursue M&A if I don't get the financing and the funding for it? But, you know, that shouldn't be holding back companies to pursue M&A if you really want this. Also valuation, I mean, it is technical, it is more of a craft, it's not necessarily arts. We as an institute provide a lot of capability building here as well. And deal design and structuring can help making deals really great and successful. So knowing how this works, supporting companies in how this works is quite important. We believe that in the region, there's great advisors around, but there's also a couple of advisors who could gear up their know-how and capabilities because companies actually need it. So that's, I think, something that would also support M&A in the region in terms of how we can support companies in making better deals. The negotiation phase that we see in the region take a little bit longer than in some other regions in the world. So closing the deals, agreeing to deals takes a little bit longer, but there's nothing wrong with it. And there may be a little bit of challenges in approvals in certain industries that are regulated in some of the countries that we mentioned so far. Some of the governments there are quite strict and still a little bit protective, but most of the jurisdictions also in the ASEAN community have created a legal environment which is improving, which gives more stability, which gives more predictability to what's happening in deals. But, you know, still the anti-competitive authorities are, some of them are still young. They haven't dealt with a lot of cases. For the big deals, that may be an issue, but for the smaller deals, that shouldn't be a big deal. At the end of the day, strategy and integration, we can, you know, plan this on PowerPoint, Excel, and in meetings and whatever forever. I truly believe at the end of the day, it is all about execution, right? It's kicking off M&A, closing deals, and also for the integration, making a great and successful integration takes way longer than the chart suggests. Usually we look at a 2-year period that this usually takes. Most of the integration stuff should be done by then. Again, we see people starting this too late, particularly some of the strategic acquirers think they have a lot of time. That's where the financial players that don't make up the major chunk here in the region yet are way more straightforward, way more prepared usually, because they know they will acquire these companies and hold them just for some time. So they will look to create value early on in the deals. And I think strategic acquirers here can learn from this. The other opportunity where we can learn is not only from other institutions or other organizations, or maybe a discussion here, but particularly you can, if you are involved in deals, try to learn also from your own deals that you may have pursued in your companies, or where you have given advice to companies and whatever. I think that may be a very interesting source. We've helped some companies do post M&A reviews as well. We see some companies even get their internal audit teams now going and scrutinize deals. So that will be interesting to see what is happening with that regard. In the next part of this discussion of the overall picture, I want to turn the page a little bit to due diligence. Some people think like, due diligence, we have figured out stuff. It's not that difficult. It's very standardized a little bit worldwide. That may be kind of due to some of the classic areas of due diligence. Kind of why do we pursue a due diligence? Because we don't know enough about the target that we buy. And particularly in some of the countries that we looked at here, understanding what this company is really all about, who are the people driving this, who are the owners, that take some time, and that's time well spent. I mean, we excluded some other areas from our analysis, like China and things, but particularly there's so many countries where you need to do a good job in seeing who you deal with. But that's the same globally. I mean, who do we deal with? Can we trust the other party, which is a very important component, I believe, and nothing that you can really put on a spreadsheet. That's where you've got to meet people. That's where you have to scrutinize the company a lot. Everything that we do in due diligence should go into our valuation model. Again, I believe, you can tailor everything and you can, manipulate numbers in the best meaning, but I think we should be very careful here what we do in the valuation field. It's easy to change growth rates and assumptions and whatever. It's quickly done and has a major effect on the valuation, but we should honestly check, like, can we deliver on what we think this is all about? Finance, tax, and legal DD, it's all probably money and time well spent. And this is something we see most people pursue on deals and conduct and due diligence, where we think that, due diligence can be better, and where probably companies should spend more time is in the green area that we labeled like, business areas. And I know it's a very, very long list of potential areas in DD here, and it's kind of a Rolls Royce. And given the fact that, some of the deals you may have to close quickly, and a due diligence exercise may be costly, and you may not be really sure whether you actually close the deal. So of course we need to be careful of what we invest in this process. But if you don't invest in this process, and if you don't invest in due diligence, you may not do the right deal. And I mean, given the fact that we looked at the numbers, we pay a lot of money for the transaction. The due diligence cost, usually, if it's not tiny acquisitions, but medium-sized, at least medium-sized transactions, are relatively negligible. I'm not trying to push any business here. I mean, IMAA is not pursuing due diligence consulting services, and we are really independent. We work with a lot of advisors and companies globally, and try to give our best advice and input to these companies. And lots of these things can be actually done, if it's a strategic acquirer, by the company itself. You just need to have the team. You just need to have the people that are knowledgeable, who are trained in this, who've done it before. I think experience matters too. And this is where I think, we are better off if we spend time at looking at the business, because lots of the stuff we look at the classical field is about the past, what has happened in the past, what are some potential liabilities from the past. But doing an acquisition and a merger is about the future. And although, of course, the seller prepare a business plan, and we look at business plans, we should really think hard about the future. And I've seen so many business plans of sellers that never worked out, right? They're, all very optimistic. So we need to be careful here and see, is it really sustainable, and how does the future look like? Last but not least, I mean, ESG is a very hot area, and we do a lot of stuff in the ESG area and look at this in terms of M&A. And this is the risk area, which always has been there, but it has been geared up in terms of also insurance parts. And you can, of course, also now get even insurance products for deals. So interesting things that have happened here in terms of the due diligence sector, and quite important to look at this too. So that's a bit for due diligence from a buy side. From a sell side, I mean, some of the sellers are overwhelmed by how long it will take to prepare some of this. And I believe the more prepared the seller is, the higher the valuations will be, because you signal quality with this. And therefore, I would also strongly suggest that any companies that look at selling bits and pieces or complete companies should probably get support. Unless you've done it many, many times before and you sell off smaller entities, then you may run the show yourselves. But of course, turning to people who are specialized in this could absolutely make sense. So that's a little bit for the due diligence part. I believe it's an important part. It can be a bridging part from a buy side into integration. So this can be also a great opportunity to prepare the integration of the company, and prepare the plans and blueprint and roadmap for integration. What are some of the other challenges that people see in M&A, and particularly once you pursue the deals? We see that people underestimate, what resources and time it is required to actually implement changing and post-merger integration while continuing to run the business. And also in the terms of capacity and freeing up people in the company that can focus on the integration. We see a lot of companies put this as an extra task on top of the daily operations to people. We should be careful here. I think we see a lot of companies that have specialized corporate M&A departments. We see some companies that have even specialized integration teams, and some companies start these teams now as they gear up M&A, which perfectly makes sense, but still in the business units and in the operational business, you need to also have people who can do this and who can deliver on some of the things we try to deliver. So that's a major, major challenge. That is not too disruptive, that you don't lose customers and revenue. Quite challenging. The second point here is that we see also really that goes back to the valuation, that goes back to the strategy part as well, that some of the targets we set in acquisitions are really hard to achieve. They should be motivating, of course. Why would we do this otherwise? But some of the goals are unrealistic. And that's where I think we should bring in early on people who need to deliver the targets, who believe in the targets, and who can also tell us where some of the targets will be unrealistic. Yeah. There's a lot of people who discuss cultural challenges in M&A, and I think they do have their merits. The interesting bit is, before closing a deal, I think we're very focused on technical stuff, on modeling and on legal aspects and negotiations, but we neglect cultural issues. And I don't refer only to cross-border issues here. I mean, it's all very clear that all our beautiful nations around the world have different cultures, and we need to be maybe culturally aware and know how to work with people across borders. But also we have professional cultures, like the people that get involved in M&A do have a certain education and professional culture. That's also part of this. And we see very few deals actually get stopped because of culture. Although we do see some companies that put this on their acquisition criteria to see there should be a culture fit between what they require. But how do you really measure this? And there was ways, of course, of doing this, but would you actually stop a deal because of this? It's an open question. We've seen very few people stop deals because of this, but the people part of it really is important. It's not just culture, because once you've done the acquisition, it's people business, and we should prepare all of this. We see a lot of acquirers, including from Singapore, who unfortunately underestimate this dimension a little bit. They think they do great deals because the strategic is compelling, financial numbers look, great, and then bringing the companies together later on is really challenging. And I think that's something that we have to sense early on in order to be able to manage expectations. Also, having the skills to deliver the plans is apparently something that is quite challenging, and that's something that actually we work with a lot of companies globally to provide these skills, to train people, to have the right capacity, to be ready to implement these M&A deals. Then there's companies where the plans are really not specific enough. Again, I told you, like, it would be great to have a great elaborated strategy and a breakdown when it comes to M&A and acquisition criteria and being prepared for integration, and that pays off later on. This investment really can make the difference between making it or breaking it. And last but not least, top management needs to be involved in this, and we see people sometimes being very excited early on in the process when preparing the deal, and kind of losing interest later on in this process, unfortunately a little bit. So that's something where some senior management needs to be aware of, that the real work sometimes starts after closing the deal. So that's an important message, and we need to be able to have senior management who's able to drive integration. It's not only a matter of an integration management office, IMO or PMO, or whatever you want to call this, and or project management. Very important to have set up this the right way, but still, I would argue it takes effort, it takes time and energy by top management to stay on, and having senior people who can drive these projects going forward. There's a comment also in the chat and Q&A on IT systems. I fully agree that IT systems are something that is totally underestimated. It always takes longer. It's always more costly to do integration here. And even if we were to run things on the same ERP system or CRM system, or using the same applications, whatever it is, most of this is so tailored, and integrating all of this is a lot of work, which is totally underestimated. It depends a little bit, of course, like how important IT is in your particular segment or industry, but I would claim that in every industry, IT plays a key role and is a major factor. But financial services, usually the cost component of IT compared to the overall cost is quite high. And so there may not be only huge synergies potentially, but realizing these synergies and creating them may be really quite challenging. And of course, like upgrading IT systems when they're old, or if there's a more investments needed because they had cut down on investments. We also just lately saw companies actually reduce spending on innovation, research and development, which is really interesting, because I mean that's the future of the company. Not sure whether that's the best idea either, but of course, when times are rough and you need to cut costs, it may be an area that you look at. But particularly if you pursue also M&A, if you try to acquire companies for their innovation potential, or if you acquire startups, whatever you look at, handle this with care. And it's very individual and specific what we to do here. Yeah. Some of the questions also posted in chat is compensation of people. I mean, I mentioned people here. Of course, compensation matters. I think keeping people on board, money may be a motivating factor, but not the only one. We should always tie these plans to performance. So don't pay people just to stay. Yeah, but actually, tie this compensation to performance, to reaching the targets of integration. And we always have discussions also with people who may leave the company later on, where it's clear they're only needed for some time as a transition. And some people take this challenge very professionally and use this as an opportunity to grow, but make compensation key part of this. There was a question also like that China doesn't seem to be that active in the region. Kind of interesting, kind of a little bit true. Again, that may be also geopolitical and other aspects that play into this. I assume that because of the current temporary situation in China, that some of the outbound investments will be restricted and will be lower for some time. But lots of the Chinese acquisitions that we saw abroad were not necessarily because of conquering markets abroad, but that was either resource-based, getting hands-on resources, particularly in the mining, oil and gas, and other sectors. And the other logic was acquiring companies for the Chinese market to bring them basically to China, use the capabilities of China. I mean, this market and country is big enough and usually growing. So why worry about some smaller countries, which I think may be an opportunity, because if there's less competition, that's kind of great. Yeah, that's a little bit for some of the questions, and keep the questions and comments coming in the chat. I try to come back to this all the time, so please feel free, particularly also on the aspects what you are interested in. I'll come back to the particularly specific company specific challenges. From the integration point of view, we believe that a lot of approaches that you should be taken are driven by the strategy you take. It can be by size, do we buy a small company? Do we buy a big company? Do we buy even something that's bigger than us? I mean, if you are, active in certain divisions already, you may take on companies that are bigger than your current division. And sometimes it's not clear who's acquiring who's taking over who. So it just looks from the outside this way. So therefore, let's assess this carefully to see what may be a best approach, and use something that's quite useful. And that approach may be even not to integrate at all. If you think it's a great piece of company, particularly if it's a smaller, highly innovative company, we should not sort of tamper with this to integrate this, because we may destroy the value that comes from this company. Also, some technical issues may avoid running an integration, particularly if you buy only minority stakes or some stakes in the company, which is interestingly one other big difference we see between acquirers in Southeast Asia and Western acquirers that always try sort of to rather grab the company in its entirety, which I'm not sure whether it's a great idea. So we see a lot of Asian acquirers take a very different approach here, which I think makes perfectly sense for this particular region. We also, from our discussions in the region, see that a lot of companies from the region acquire not only companies in Southeast Asia or Asia, but also look at acquiring companies in Australia or Europe or Africa as a growth region, or Americas. So I think these are also real challenges that Asian companies are facing, and how to handle these acquisitions abroad, and how to manage these companies going forward, given time zone, cultural management differences, and things like this. Quite a challenge, and happy to elaborate more on this if required and of interest to you. Yeah, so that's a little bit for the part that I wanted to present on what we see in terms of deal activity recently and giving you a little bit of an outlook. So the outlook is really positive. From the second part, I just wanted to, highlight a little bit, what is some of the homework that particularly some of the strategic acquirers should look at and look into. And there's, of course, way more to do here, but, given that time is scarce, I don't want to overdo it, and happy to take any questions that you have to be able to elaborate more deeply into this later on. I would like to hand over now to my colleagues to show you a little bit of what we do a little bit in helping companies and who we are. So I'd like to introduce you to Alex Barry and Justin Faryani to present to you about capability building. All right, so one of the questions is how to get into M&A without prior experience. Good one, depending on where you are in your career. We see some people that try to do this, whether getting some educational experience. This is not a guarantee, right? I mean, we don't want to play with the hopes of people. Primarily, the people that pursue our programs are experienced professionals, which may have some M&A experience or integration experience. Depending on where you are in your career, is like we see a lot of people, switch from consulting firms. I mean, trying to get started into the field with chartered accountants and banks, private equity. Starting private equity is sometimes a little bit difficult. So of course, gaining experience there. We see also people that join in the company corporate M&A. Again, not usually the first step. Usually they recruit rather from organizations that provide a lot of M&A experience in terms of consulting firms. So if you're relatively early on in your career, starting in junior roles and rolling up the sleeves and doing deals, that's kind of a little bit of how to get started in M&A. And then again, depending on where you are in your career, there's lots of different tracks of how you can do this. Somebody has posted he's in the audit space of banking sector. Again, there is I know a lot of people from auditing who get involved in M&A in terms of either due diligence exercise, or I mean, we mentioned also even like internal auditing now at companies that that look at getting internal audit and M&A as well involved. So there's definitely lots of space for audit people in this. I think what we need to understand that auditing is different from doing deals. Yeah, I mean, if you do an audit on a company, it's not the same like a financial due diligence. Yes, we're looking now at the numbers and whatever, but it's a very different perspective, right? We worry about other things when we acquire a company. So therefore, we need to switch maybe a little bit mentality from audit and learn. But it's a great opportunity, and I think it's easier to breaking from audit into M&A than from many other organizations. There's a question on like the certification and the recognition by the Singapore government. I mean. As we have been around for a very long time as an institution, more than 15 years, my first time to Singapore was more than 10 years ago. And, the steps we do in building the institute globally, but also in Singapore, are very sustainable. And that's why we've also obtained, the quality insurance and approval by IBF for our programs. Not everybody, gets this. So that's clearly a signal that this is recognized. The other bits is there are lots of other constituencies in Singapore that work with us and that know us, and apparently they like us. Otherwise, we wouldn't be with you in supporting the ecosystem for Singaporean companies. But also in the region, as this is part of the strategy of Singapore. And so definitely we are recognized as one important puzzle and feature in the ecosystem for Singaporean companies in M&A, and therefore this is pretty much recognized. And you benefit also from all of our global efforts in pushing recognition, like our ISO certification and other things. But all in all, education in that part is relatively unregulated industry where you see lots of strange organizations around as well. And we put a lot of efforts into also the resources that we provide to you. One thing that we didn't mention here, for instance, like we have our online library. We purchase licenses on all the latest books on M&A and whatever that our members and participants can benefit from. So we will soon launch a cooperation with Harvard Business Publishing and whatever. So we invest a lot into the right steps to provide quality, and that's what gets recognized by large corporate players all around the world, without mentioning any names. Some we've signed NDAs with, and also that seems to be recognized by the Singapore government and its institutions. Yeah, I mean, maybe I take this question. So and continue. Thank you, Justin. I mean, one thing is like we want basically people to complete, right? I mean, it's not necessarily like easy. It's not a kind of certificate mill or something. We don't give away this, otherwise people would not take this certification seriously. And we have employers who, of course, reach out to us and ask, like, did this person really complete this? And we've had cases where people had not completed it. But it's very individual, right? I mean, a self-paced program compared to virtual or on-site, in the future, but virtual live program, it's very difficult. And it depends on your learning mode that Alex referred to. It's highly individual where you can succeed and what is the best option for you. That's why we're probably the only provider in that space that offers so much flexibility, because we've learned over the years that, of course, it is highly individual what you're interested in, what your motivation is, what's the best learning mode for you. That's why sometimes people can also switch, later on, getting started in the self-paced online program. If you find out like, yeah, that's not for me because like I have so many job obligation or family, or I mean, life is full of wonderful things. And then you can switch, the program later on to virtual life as well, in order to get out of this program what you need in terms of learning. And that's one thing that we really care about. And for us, every participant that starts ideally really completes the program, because that's what we see as a success, that people succeed in learning and succeed in completing the program, compared to maybe some other programs globally, not in the M&A space, but in the financial world. Like if you were to compare this with CFA level 1, 2, 3 or whatever, which is a sometimes highly theoretical program where you've lots of hours to study and high failure rates. We believe this is a very hands-on program, very practical. We have a lot of faculty members who do lots of deals and share lots of their deal experience, because we believe M&A is very applied. And that's where we, with our case studies, with the assignments in the program, try to bring really relevant learning experience to the table, which is very much doable also for people without experience. I mean, there was a question about like, can I complete this without prior experience? Yes, you can. I mean, of course, it's a little bit harder because like you need to probably study a little bit more, but if you're familiar with some of the themes in the training in terms of valuation, you will be quicker, right? If you know some of the bit already, and there may be parts where it takes a little bit longer, and that's why such a learning journey is very, very individual. But we've had participants who complete this without prior experience, because that was one motivation why they take this program. I mean, there's a lot of different motivations why people pursue these programs. But many of our participants pursue it because they have relevant learning needs. They want to use this hands-on deals with sometimes people who quickly leave the room to make phone calls to say like, oh, I have a deal going on, and this was really just in time, to consider this for this deal. That's always where we think like, yes, we've done our job well in designing a program where people can use this right away, on a transaction. I think there's no better thing to see here. A question of the prerequisites. So ideally, you have a degree or you have professional experience or a designation. Globally, that is a sort of prerequisite. But other than that, we again keep prerequisites rather low because we believe there's a reason why people want to pursue this program. And then they will have the opportunity to successfully complete the program and show and demonstrate, learning progress. That's why the barriers are not too high. So there's few prerequisites, but it's usually not huge, and that's usually not a challenge. And again, there's a reason why.
Thank you very much, Professor Kummer. I'm very happy to continue this presentation onwards. I hope everybody can see my screen. I'm very happy to introduce myself. My name is Alexander Barry, and I'm the Managing Director of the IMAA Institute. And I'm very happy to present you the kind of initiatives we have taken in order to prepare companies and managers who are actually in the field of M&As or who are actually pursuing an acquisition. I'm happy to share that with you. And we will also share a little bit about our institute first. So the institute has been founded in 2004 by Professor Kummer, and we have been growing ever since. And we're probably considered the most global M&A training institute and think tank worldwide. We have branch offices in Singapore, New York, Vienna, and Zurich. I'm based in Vienna, and my colleagues Feriane and Justin, Justin will also speak about the IBF funding shortly. They are both based in Singapore to support our Singaporean participants. So we have trained more than 2,500 people who are current charter holders of the IMAA Institute from more than 70 countries. We are proud that we have already trained more than people from more than 1,400 companies worldwide. We're actually really reaching out to the global community. And I think this is especially also given our expertise and our faculty setup. We have more than 100 faculty members and M&A experts around the globe who are joining us for either on-site trainings once it's possible again. We know that for training providers, it's quite tough during the Corona times, but we are very confident that we can soon next year start on-site trainings again. But we have always been also very much focusing on virtual live trainings as well as online trainings. Therefore, we have recorded more than 55 hours of faculty videos, which you can find on our learning platform. We are proud that we have more than 27,000 registered users. So probably we are one of the biggest M&A kind of meeting hub, and lots of those users really also make use of our e-library, which has a lot of M&A information resources, more than 130,000 books available for our members and training participants even after they have finished their trainings or completed their trainings with us. We have done several trainings, dozens of trainings, on-site virtual trainings. And also in Singapore, we actually will have another training coming up, a virtual training specifically for the Singaporean and Asian market next week, focusing on post-merger integration. And of course, as a global educational provider, we have certain standards, very high quality standards, and we are recognized by many important and known accreditation bodies and organizations. So we, as a training provider, we want to really make sure that we provide, everybody has a kind of, every person has a kind of different learning type, or is a kind of different learning type. So really, we want to provide all sorts of training modalities, let's so to say, or modes. So we of course have our online self-paced program, which is for persons who are really like busy, who want to want to make sure that they have the maximum flexibility. So they log in our portal and can watch the videos and the content and do the assignments online, and make sure that they have the maximum flexibility. So you can do it from home, during vacation, and on the weekends, after work, whenever you want to. And then we have, of course, the virtual live trainings, which became quite popular during the pandemic. Of course, this is, of course, more interactive. You are in a similar setup as we are right now in a Zoom webinar, where you can interact with the trainers, where you can really also have a lively discussion with peers who might have the same struggles or the same problems during integration or questions. So this is our virtual live training, which we host quite frequently, and there will always be spots for people depending on the region where you live in. And then hopefully soon again we will host our on-site trainings, and also in Singapore again. So we hope that once the Corona crisis is really stabilized, that we will be able to offer that again, and you will find information about that on our homepage soon. And then, of course, as we work with a lot of big multinational companies, we often have to request for tailored in-house trainings for their specific teams, because sometimes companies want to have confidential trainings among their staff members. So we also, of course, offer in-house and tailored trainings for teams. If there is a specific interest, please feel free to reach out to my colleagues Feryani and Justin. So what we try to do, we really try to cover all aspects of the kind of M&A field with our training. So I mean, I've mentioned already that we have online and virtual classes, and if you look at our program span, we currently offer 5 certification programs. I would say our flagship program is the International Mergers and Acquisitions Experts, which includes, like the essentials of the merger and acquisitions field, the due diligence part of it, the very important finance and valuation part, which you will also find back in the M&AP professional, merger and acquisition professionals, and of course the best of post-merger integration. Yeah. Second certification we offer is the merger and acquisition professional, also offers the essentials of M&A due diligence, finance valuation, and how to run a successful M&A practice and projects. This is particularly, I think, interesting for people who are about to join an M&A advisory, who want to open their own M&A boutique advisory, for example. So particularly for people who are on the advising side, I would say. The IMAA, the International Merger and Acquisition Expert, is really for kind of people who want to have a kind of an overall view on the merger and acquisition field. And then we have, of course, certified post-merger integration specialist certification. This program is particular for people who are really in the integration field. Yeah. So it also includes the essential of M&A function integration and integration management of synergies, and of course change and cultural management. Yeah. So this training, for example, we have a Singaporean training coming up next week, really focusing on the certified post-merger integration specialist field. And then our 2 new programs, which we have just introduced, the legal mergers and acquisition expert, which is we're also supported by the Law Society Singapore, and the HR mergers and acquisition specialist, which of course, as you can see, the legal part of course then focuses more on commercial law, contracts and labor law, antitrust, IP and regulatory affairs, and the HR certification really focuses then more also on the kind of integration side, when we talk about compensation benefits, the HR integration, and the change management. When 2 companies come together with 2 different company cultures, then HR is also a big issue, and this is what we're going to tackle in this specific program. What we've chosen for is to really have a kind of a modular approach on all our trainings, meaning that you can easily combine certifications, and so you can actually kind of build up your career track and then, you know, collect the digital seals and designations by combining programs. Yeah, and I mean, this is, I mean, this slide looks kind of the first instance like, okay, how is this set up? But it's quite simple. You can see like what are the modules which have to be taken, for example, for the international merchant acquisition expert training, and then if you just add, for example, successful M&A and practice and projects from the M&AP program, you would have double certifications. And this is, you can see this throughout this slide, how you can actually combine your programs and really build up kind of your knowledge in the M&A field so that you can really make sure that you are not doing things double, but that you add certain disciplines and know-how to your M&A knowledge, so to say. Thank you very much.